Hi everyone, and welcome back to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And yesterday we started talking about detective fiction, and we started right at the beginning.
That's right. We talked about Edgar Allan Poe, the famous American writer who wrote about a detective, actually a French detective that he created in his imagination. But this is one of the first detectives we see in these murder mystery stories, and a lot of the things that Edgar Allan Poe wrote about his characters and the way he solves crimes, though while those things have been copied and repeated by many other writers with many other characters over the years, Dupin used logic and imagination to solve crimes. He would look at what he could see as evidence and then use his imagination to sort of answer some of the other questions that he might have in order to find the answer to the mystery.
And of course, the same technique was used by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle with the Sherlock Holmes stories, with Agatha Christie and her Poirot character. Another influence was how Poe wrote the stories from the point of view of the detective's friend or helper, not the detective.
True,
because
absolutely.
This kept the answer a secret, it made the detective even more amazing, and it gives the readers the chance to work out the answer, like how Doyle used Dr. Watson to tell the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Exactly. So Doyle also, along with Edgar Allan Poe and many others, they also wrote these locked room mysteries. The first one actually was written by Edgar Allan Poe as well, Murders in the Rue Morgue. This would be a mystery with a body. It's maybe someone was killed in a room, but the windows, the doors were locked. It doesn't seem possible that a person could have killed them and gotten out. So how did this happen? One of the great brain teasers or mysteries that we enjoy when we read these detective stories.
Yeah, but we're on a journey here to find out how detective fiction has changed and gone in different directions. And today we're going to look at another kind of detective. Let's check it out.
Reading. Opening the case files of detective fiction. Agatha Christie's Poirot was influenced by Dupin, but her other famous detective, Miss Marple, is a different kind of sleuth. She's an elderly lady who lives in a quiet, charming English village, St. Mary Mead. Needless to say, she's not as energetic as younger investigators. Instead of crawling around crime scenes, she talks to people to discover the facts of a case. She also has a wonderful memory for local gossip and other crimes she's investigated or heard of. She can pick up on small details in conversations that lead her to the truth. All of these help her solve her cases. The Miss Marple stories are an example of a subgenre of detective fiction called cozy mysteries. In these stories, the detectives are often female and usually amateurs. Any murders that take place are not described in detail. In addition, the stories are generally set in small communities rather than big cities. Other examples of these detectives include the famous young detective Nancy Drew and Jessica Fletcher in the TV series Murder, She Wrote.
All right, so let's look at another one of the great writers of detective fiction. We've already talked about Edgar Allan Poe and a little bit about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who of course created Sherlock Holmes, but there's another one. This lady is a giant in the world of detective stories. Agatha Christie, that's the lady's name. Agatha Christie's Poirot, her character, was influenced by Dupin, but her other famous detective, Miss Marple, is a different kind of sleuth. Yeah, so Agatha Christie, she wrote, 60 or 70 books? She wrote a lot of books, and she had two main detectives in most of her stories. Hercule Poirot, who was the detective, kind of like Sherlock Holmes or Dupin. He would look for clues and use his amazing creative mind, his little gray cells, to kind of find the answer. Miss Marple, though, she was like a a 70-year-old woman. She wasn't running around chasing bad guys or looking for fingerprints, so that's why they call her a different kind of sleuth. Now, when we use the word sleuth in this kind of situation, we basically mean a detective. Someone who solves crimes, solves puzzles, finds the clues, comes up with the amazing answers using logic and imagination. So it could be someone who works for the police department. You could call a detective a sleuth. But it's also something we might call a character in a story, or maybe even your friend who's always good at saying, I know how this happened. They have that brain kind of like a detective. So tell us more about Miss Marple, one of the more unlikely detectives in any story.
Indeed. Well, as Mike kind of mentioned, she's an elderly lady, who lives in a quiet, charming English village, St. Mary Mead.
She's everyone's grandmother, basically.
Yeah, so she's elderly. Elderly is used to mean old. We generally use it of a person who's probably above 70 years old. Yeah, my parents are late 60s. I wouldn't call them elderly to their face. But my grandma, who is 90, she would certainly be described as elderly, and she'd be okay with that.
Definitely.
All right, so for example, as a sentence, we could say, I think you need to speak louder. This elderly man can't hear very well.
Oh, okay.
And she lives in a charming little English village.
That's right, she does. And when we think of charming, especially when we're talking about places, we kind of think it's pleasing, it's delightful, it's cute, it's attractive. It's probably small in some kind of way. It's kind of almost like a picture that you would see, and you would drive by a charming village or see a charming lake, you know, in a forest, and you'd probably want to stop and spend some time there, take some pictures of it, because it's cute or pleasing and attractive in a very special kind of way. For example, we had lunch in a charming village by a lake. Had a little church, a little town center, a little lake. Oh, it was just lovely, like a postcard or a picture in a storybook.
Okay, so back to Miss Marple. We know she's old, and also the article says, needless to say, she's not as energetic as younger investigators.
True.
Yeah, she's not going to be chasing bad guys down a dark alley and pulling a gun or something like that.
She doesn't use kung fu to like beat up the bad guy.
Yeah, she is just not quite as energetic. We'll talk about that in a moment, but first we're going to look at today's language in focus. So that last sentence started with the phrase needless to say. And we use this to say that something is very obvious when you look at it, when you think about it, and therefore you don't even really need to point it out. You're kind of confirming to whoever's reading or listening to you that, yep, this is pretty obvious. I don't really need to emphasize this, but I will anyway. For example, I got a good grade on my exam. Needless to say, my parents were very proud. Of course they were proud. I don't even really need to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. So, yes, Miss Marple, she's an old lady.
Yes.
She is not energetic.
Well, no, she's probably not fist-fighting bad guys or going on high-speed car chases, but there are other ways someone might be energetic. But you're right, elderly people, tired people, people who don't feel very well, who have, sickness or problems with their body, they might not be feeling energetic. Or if you're like me, you wake up on a Monday morning, it's cold, gray, and raining, and you just want to stay in bed. Even getting up to brush your teeth is like, oh, I can't do it. I have no power. I'm not feeling energetic. Energetic is full of energy. You've had a great night's sleep. It's Friday. You're going to have a fun time this weekend. The sun's shining. The weather's great. You feel fantastic and full of energy, life, vim, vigor, and vitality. In other words, you don't feel tired and slow and lazy. You feel the opposite. For example, house cats often get very energetic late in the evening. That's right. If you ever had cats, it's around 10:30, 11 at night. That's the time they're running around and playing with each other. I think because they go hunting at night.
Right.
I think that's probably why. So even if they're at home and they've just had dinner, they're still going to be energetic in the middle of the night and sleep in the middle of the day.
Okay, so she's not an energetic investigator, but she is still an investigator. An investigator is someone who investigates things. Usually crimes, but it could be any kind of other incident with the purpose of finding out the truth of what happened. For example, if there was a big accident at a factory or if there was a fire, you might send in an investigator to learn what caused it, examine the details, talk to people, piece together the true incidents to see what went on. So investigator, detective, sleuth. In this article, all these mean basically the same thing.
That's right. A detective, of course, is an investigator of crimes. But as you say, you could have a fire in a factory. No one got hurt. No one died. There was no crime here. We just want to know how it happened. So we'll send fire investigators to get the facts, to get the answers. So she's not an energetic investigator, but she still is a detective, right? She still solves the crimes. That's why we read the book. So how does she do it? How does she do that? Well, it says, instead of crawling around crime scenes, she talks to people to discover the facts of a case. Sherlock Holmes actually spends some time on his hands and knees crawling around looking for hairs or little things that he can use to prove the case in some way. Agatha Christie doesn't do that. She's sitting in a comfortable chair with a nice cup of tea or something, but at the same time, she's talking to people to discover the facts of a case. She gets the answers by talking to the people who were there or nearby when the crime happened. But she's not going to be crawling around on the floor, on the ground, looking for clues. If you're crawling, you're basically on your hands and knees, kind of like how an animal would walk. They don't actually crawl, they walk, but we usually walk on two legs. But if you're on the ground, if you're pretending to be a horse as a kid, if you're looking for something that went under the table, you can't see it from where you're standing, so you have to get down on your hands, on your knees, and you're moving around kind of like a baby does before they start to walk. You are crawling. For example, after falling and hurting his back, Neil had to crawl to the phone to call for help. Oh my gosh, he was hurt so bad he couldn't walk.
So Miss Marple talks to people and she learns the facts this way. We also see she also has a wonderful memory for local gossip and other crimes she's investigated or heard of.
Interesting.
Yeah, Holmes did this as well. He knew the history of crime and he used that to give him ideas about whatever crime he was looking at. Miss Marple does a bit of the same thing. She remembers, oh, a few years ago he said this about this person and I learned this fact and I remember them talking about this kind of crime in a newspaper a few years ago. Maybe that happened here.
Interesting.
Yes, and that's how she investigates. It's like the word investigator, to find out what happened. This is just the verb form, to find out all the facts about a crime, an incident, a person, and so on. Yep, that's the kind of detective she is.
Exactly, there you go. So she'll talk to three people, they'll tell her the same sort of story about where they were, but then she'll remember that two of them said one thing, another said something different, and that doesn't match up. But she needs that memory to record all of that stuff in her head. So as it says, she can pick up on small details in conversations that lead her to the truth. You know, three people said, I was nearby. One guy says, I went to get tea before we heard someone shout help. And then another person says, oh, he definitely left after someone shouted help. She'll remember that and she'll be able to catch people when they lie or pick up on the lies and the truth. All right, we had this phrase to pick up on, all right? You have to be very good at remembering details to pick up on any clues people might tell you, even if they're not planning to. When you pick up on something, you notice something. You see something that other people might not pay attention to or might not think is important, and you do. You notice that. You think, hey, that's important. What I saw, what someone said, maybe even how they said something, the sound or the tone in their voice. If someone comes home and you say, hey, how was your day? And they say, it was great. You say, okay, you had a really good day. But if someone came home and you said, how was your day? And they say, it was great. I'm picking up on the way you said it was great, and I'm picking up that it wasn't really that great. I noticed that, okay? If someone wasn't really paying attention, they might not pick up on that. They might not notice that. Good detectives, of course, always have to pick up on anything that can lead them to the killer or the murderer. And of course, when these detectives pick up on enough clues, it can then lead them to finding the bad guy, catching the killer, for example.
That's right. If something leads to something else, it causes this thing to happen. More specifically, it can make somebody think of something. This led me to this. It formed the connection in my mind. One thing, then another thing, and the end result happened. So those are all these different skills or abilities Miss Marple has.
That's right. She might not be the toughest, strongest detective out there, but she's got a brilliant mind. And as the article says, all of these, her mind and the way she is able to remember things, all of these help her solve her cases or catch the bad guys.
Now we then move on to talk about how Miss Marple kind of fits into all these different types of detective stories. The article says, the Miss Marple stories are an example of a subgenre of detective fiction called cozy mysteries.
Cozy.
Yeah,
like
cozy.
A nice warm sweater.
Exactly. So we'll discuss that in a moment. First, we're going to take a quick look at the word subgenre. So we saw yesterday how a genre breaks down the different types of an art, different types of movies, of music, of writing. A subgenre is when you break one of those types down even further into more types. So think of horror movies, that's a genre, but there are different kinds of horror movies. Could be a vampire horror movie, could be a ghost horror movie, could be a crazy killer horror movie. Take fantasy stories. Fantasy is a genre, but then there is urban fantasy that takes place in the real world. High fantasy with elves and dragons. Grimdark fantasy where everybody is kind of bad, there's no real goodness and hope in the world. All of those are subgenres of one of the main genres. And it's the same with detective stories. You have these classic mysteries of the likes of Sherlock Holmes and Poirot, but here we have a cozy mystery.
Interesting. So what exactly is a cozy mystery? What is this subgenre of the mystery style of writing? It says a cozy mystery is a work of crime fiction in which there's less violence and other adult materials, and the crime and detection take place in a small, socially intimate community. So imagine Miss Marple in her cute little charming town. This isn't a place filled with gangs and murderers and all sorts of crime like in the city. And when the crimes happen, it's not something with lots of blood and violence or something. It's someone gets poison in their tea and they kill someone else, and it's all very sort of clean and nice. And of course, other adult materials, we mean kind of less sex and violence.
Yes.
And things like that. So it's the kind of mystery story or mystery movie you could happily watch with your grandmother, and she wouldn't go, oh my gosh, what am I looking at? Or, oh, that's terrible. No, it's all very kind of cute and comfortable and safe, but still there's that danger. There is a mystery and someone was murdered, but not in a bad way.
Right, or maybe
nice
it's
way.
A theft mystery.
Oh, could be
Who
a theft,
stole
sure.
this thing? You
Right.
know, why did this happen? Maybe a missing person.
An important jewel goes missing.
Yes.
Yeah.
We also, here's some more kind of general features of cozy mysteries.
Okay.
In these stories, the detectives are often female and usually amateurs. Okay. Female is pretty obvious. Female means a lady, a woman, a girl, that kind of thing. So for example, we could say, how come they are called the X-Men if some of them are female?
It's a good question.
It's a very good question.
There's no ex-women or ex-people.
Nope. Well, let's have to move on from that issue to what is an amateur?
An amateur is someone who does something for fun. It could be something people do as a job, but I'm not doing it for work. I'm not doing it as a job. That would make me a professional, right? Someone who does something as a job and gets paid for it as a professional. If I love to go golfing, but I've never been paid money or never won anything, I just love golf or love to do some kind of sport, I'm an amateur sports person. If I'm playing with Tiger Woods and the best in the world, then I would be a professional. But if it's something you like to do, from cooking to singing to playing sports, and you do it just for fun as a hobby in your free time, you are an amateur at that job.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes is a professional. He gets paid.
He gets paid, yeah, that's true.
Miss Marple is an amateur. She just kind of does it because she's there at the time and she can help clear things up.
She's trying to help her friends or something.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the article then says, any murders that take place are not described in detail. You know?
Oh, true.
We're not looking at bodies and blood on the floor. And there's another common feature as well here.
In addition, it says the stories are generally set in small communities rather than big cities. That's right, Miss Marple never solved a crime in downtown London. It was always in a small town out in the countryside, which kind of makes it a little safer and nicer, but also means that almost anyone in the community could be the bad guy, could be the killer, which gives it a little bit of excitement and danger. When we talk about a community, basically we're just talking about any group or any place where people live together. There's all sorts of different communities around the world, but in this sense, we're probably talking about places like cities, but much, much smaller. A village, a small town, something like that. Your neighborhood could be a community. The city of Taipei is a big community with millions of people in it. But generally, it's a smaller place like that where people might know each other, they might live together, they might sort of see each other or have some part in each other's lives in a more common way, like in a village or a small town. For example, people in the community were shocked by the news that the mayor had been arrested. This is a small town. This kind of thing only happens in the big cities, not in a small community like ours.
Yeah, so that is what a cozy mystery is like.
Okay.
The article says other examples of these detectives include the famous young detective Nancy Drew and Jessica Fletcher in the TV series Murder, She Wrote.
I remember that TV series. She actually reminded me of Miss Marple in many ways. She's an elderly lady and her friends are always being murdered.
Yeah. And she was the main character of a TV series. A series, of course, is a set of books or TV shows or movies when a long story or many small stories are told about the same character or group of characters in sort of episodes over a long period of time. TV series, for example. So that is Cozy Mysteries and Miss Marple. We have another very different kind of detective to look at tomorrow, but right now we'll go to our For You Chat question.
You chat.
So our chat question today is, do you prefer cozy mysteries, like we talked about today, or darker crime stories?
Wow.
Explain your answer.
That's a good question. Well, like you, I think I'm kind of a fan of a good detective mystery story. I like to read them once in a while. I think for me, it depends on my mood. Sometimes you're into the darker crime stories and you want to see the blood and really have bad people doing bad crimes. But then other times you want something a little nicer, a little, more comfortable, a little happier, maybe a cozy mystery. I try to read a cozy Christmas mystery every year around Christmas.
Nice.
I've read the Santa Claus mystery, the Christmas card mystery.
Nice.
I find these stories nice because at Christmas, you don't want to read something with blood and dying people and all sorts of terrible crime. But if you still want a little bit of that excitement of a mystery, a cozy mystery at Christmas is perfect.
Yeah, I would probably agree. Sometimes you just want a nice little story with a bit of a mystery, a bit of an interesting clue, and a nice, clever answer. You don't need to have some guns and blood and murder and secrets and stuff.
True. I think that's why cozy mysteries have become successful TV shows, right?
Yeah.
Because every week people don't want the really scary story. Something relaxing with a little bit of excitement is fun.
Well, that's the end of our whole article today. Join us again tomorrow for Detective number 3. We'll see you then. Bye for now.
Vocabulary Review.
Elderly. At 90 years old, Betty moved out of her house and into a group home for elderly people. Charming. We rented a nice room in a charming little hotel next to the river. Energetic. Kathy got a great night's sleep yesterday, so she feels energetic and cheerful today. Crawl. This young baby has only just started to crawl around the living room floor. Female. You can tell these birds are female because their feathers are plain. Males have bright feathers. Community. People in this community like to plant lots of flowers in the gardens behind their homes.
智慧小补帖
Sleuth. Investigator. Cozy mystery. Amateur. Series.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net